Well, and I want to lean into it a little bit in this next kind of segment. And y'all let us know. This is the third video I think we're going to do in this segment. If you like this kind of freewheeling discussion that gets chopped up and put into other videos, because it's not a live show. We do that some with live shows, but this is just a kind of a different format for us. Kind of the dark future of college football. And I think that like we're at a pivot point where we're doing a little Minority Report thing where we're precogging this, and this could go this direction, but it doesn't have to go this direction. But I want to outline for all the people that are so much for player mobility and this notion of players' rights where they were exploited before, and we're not saying they weren't, but I think that the pendulum has swung so far without consideration for unintended consequences. We're heading, if we don't course correct, we're heading into a dark future of college football. And I would say that there's two things that I want to really touch on. And the first one is what it's going to do to these lesser teams. The second one is the delicate balance of fan interest in this sport because it's so unique. I want to talk about that in a second. So I'm setting it up for you so you can be thinking. But first, I want to talk about this thing that I don't think people consider. And when we talked about this in the other video about how, it's no longer an academic focus or a scholarship focus, and a lot of scholarships are going to go by the wayside. We said that in the context of G5 teams or these lesser P5 teams that might fall by the wayside. But I think the immediate hit is FCS. If we go super conference, if we go like NIL heavy, we expand the playoffs, and we so many people complain about these FCS games. I love them because I know what they mean to FCS players. If anybody in the chat or in the comments knows anybody who ever played an FCS program, they've heard them talk about playing in Bryant-Denny Stadium, playing in Jordan-Hare Stadium, playing in front of the Texas football crowd. Like that, it means the world to them, but these programs are absolutely going to die first, and then a bunch of G5s too. Why don't you talk about it?
When we start talking about what let's say the dark future of college football looks like, I think it starts with realizing that fan interest is really necessarily limited to that which they have time to watch. And for FCS schools, interest just isn't that high. There's some programs like North Dakota State or back in the day Appalachian State that are pretty popular and they do get watched. But for the vast majority of schools in FCS, those schools are already being subsidized. And when I say subsidized, it's twofold. One, they're being subsidized on the academic end. The school is dumping in more money than the sport probably generates. And two, it's being subsidized by those playing games where they make between $500,000 and I think now it's approaching more like $2 to $3 million to play a major school. And that funds programs for a year or more. They don't have 85 scholarships in FCS. They have a lower number. Costs are lower. Travel is lower, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if they aren't involved in any way in this process, if super conferences form and they all go to 9 or 10 game conference schedules, that means the odds, the 1 or 2 games that you may slot in for an FCS team start to disappear. And people talk about, Alabama's and their FCS opponent, or they talk about Georgia and their FCS opponent. Look, that's kind of one thing, but really what we're talking about here, and this is maybe the transition point, FCS doesn't depend on just those schools. They also play the G5s. Sometimes they play like a G5 or a lower tier program twice, even though with bowl eligibility you can only count one under the way the rules are set. And those games are really, really important for those athletic departments to operate. But if the G5 gets separated from the super conferences where they don't get to play the super conferences anymore, then those schools are going to be desperate for revenue and they're not going to want to play as many FCS games. So you can get hit really on both ends. For the super conferences, the G5 games are the once a year outlier. And for the G5 games, they can maybe afford an FCS, but that's a payment game and they've got to be able to make more by hosting their game than they pay out by giving the FCS game. It's usually a revenue source, right? You want an extra home game. You don't want to pay someone to travel. You do it that way. But if their revenue falls, that falls. And I think maybe that segues into another point. If we're sort of dancing around this issue, talking about revenue and all that, does the revenue fall? Why does the revenue fall? Where does the revenue go? that's the heart of the issue, because I think there is a spiral for revenue and fan interest that is really dangerous, and it's the thing that could cause these sorts of dominoes to start falling and cause these sorts of shifts in the college football landscape that has a lot of negative consequences.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of this. Fans aren't going to tolerate fall camp holdouts. And we saw this, I think, at Miami for basketball, where we had a holdout because he wanted a better NIL deal or something like that, because he had a good tournament, something like that. When NIL becomes standard across the board, we're going to have holdouts for fall camp because people are reworking their deal. We're going to have people who said this or that to get somebody to transfer there under the guise of NIL and then don't give them a deal once they're locked in, and they're going to hold out there. This is going to become so much about the money, and I don't blame these kids, because if I was 18 years old and and somebody put $1 million in front of me, like, obviously I'm going to be about the money, and then I'm going to do a bunch of silly stuff with the money, and I'm not going to be focused on football. So I think it's going to overall erode the sport, and that's just one example. Like, fans want, again, even if it's just a wink and a nod, they want this veneer of student athlete. And that's why I've always said, and it's never going to happen, but I've always said I wish we could take the players who really think they have a pro future and aren't interested in academics and put them in a feeder league to the NFL. And they, like Major League Baseball, where you maybe sign, if you're a superstar, you sign a big deal out of high school, and you might make $1 million your first year. Whereas most minor league baseball players are making like 28 grand. Like, you might be the one guy on that team that's going to move up. We can do that. And then for the fan, if you take the top 10, 15% of players out of college football, to the fan, they don't care. They don't care if the average wide receiver is now running a 4.7 instead of a 4.5. Like, that doesn't, to them, it's all relative. Everything around them adjusts, and everybody gets a little less good. But when they play each other on the field, it doesn't matter. But I think that the money thing is really going to turn fans off. And people don't realize, Josh, the delicate balance of the history and the attachment to a school that people have that transcends just athletic performance on the field.
And I think what you're getting at here is really the crux of the whole problem. And it's this assumption that if you go to an NFLification or a pro sportsification of college football, that you'll necessarily retain the same sort of viewership numbers you have now. From the major broadcasters, if you're a broadcaster that has one of the two super conferences, and I think we know the 3 and 4 letter networks we're all talking about here, ESPN and Fox don't really care what happens to a lot of the other conferences, frankly, because what they want to be able to do is they want to get as much money as they can out of each broadcast. And in their world, if the other 80 schools disappear and all they got to do is broadcast an Ohio State game, and they broadcast the Georgia game, they can put their main crews on them. They can broadcast them in 4K. They'll make more money on that game because it's the big event, and that's good. It's efficient. It's going to be profitable. That's a good thing for them. But I think that is a short-term outlook. And the reason I say that is ratings for college football games are driven more by the national audience than they are for the local audience. College football fans are very engaged. They like watching teams that aren't their own play football games. And they watch them because they're engaged with their own team in their own season, and they want to follow the sport. But if you start disenfranchising people, I don't think people realize the impact that's going to have. If you're a Georgia Tech fan and your school doesn't matter, why are you going to watch? If you're a Virginia Tech fan, if you're a Virginia fan, if you're a North Carolina fan even, there are a lot of these schools that may drop out of this discussion. And those fans right now, they're watching Alabama LSU. They're watching Ohio State Michigan. They're a huge part of those ratings. So in this discussion of keeping up ratings or fan interest or brand loyalty, I think people in media, I don't think they get it. I think they assume, well, you know what? It's not a big deal. If you were, if you're a Cincinnati fan, in Cincinnati now, they don't make a super conference and they're not really being talked about, or they're not being televised even, well, they'll just become Ohio State fans. I don't think it's that simple. I don't. If you're a Miami of Ohio fan and Miami of Ohio cuts their football program, I don't know that you keep watching football the same way you do now. I think you're going to lose a lot of interest. And so I think that has a negative aspect. And I'll give you a data point to sort of back this up a little bit. And this idea of the things we think are going to make it popular don't necessarily hold true over time. When we had our first college football playoff, there were 34 million people that watched the national championship game. There were 28 million people that watched the semi and the Rose. Those numbers are substantially higher than any other playoff since. And in fact, they've generally been going down year on year. 2019, okay, so not counting the pandemic year as a weird year, but 2019, we went from 34 and 28 to the national championship, LSU Clemson. That was 25 million. And even the Clemson Ohio State game was 21. LSU Oklahoma, 17 million. That's a drop of about a third from where it was when the playoff first opened. And that's because when the playoff started, we all had this idea that everybody's relevant. Anything could happen. It was a playoff. It was new. It was exciting. And the ratings were good. And I think the super conferences, the ratings will be good for a couple years. And then what happened is you get people that just get disinterested. If you're not a fan of the schools that were in those games, you stop caring. There are a lot of fans that don't care to watch Alabama win another title. There are a hell of a lot of fans that don't care to see that. And now that they feel like it's a foregone conclusion that Clemson and Ohio State and Alabama are in the championship game, a good 30% of people are not tuning into the playoff. And I think that same phenomena will occur in the regular season. And this is the spiral. If that occurs in the regular season, then ratings are going to drop. And if ratings drop, then this whole structure and system that we've created because of money suddenly doesn't have as much money. And pretty quickly, things will shrink. Athletic departments can't spend what they were spending. Things get less nice. But now you've already ruined the general slate of college football. That's not going to get fixed. And so everything starts year by year to contract because you're not going to get these fans back that you've previously lost, but you've already lost money. Now you lose money. Your product gets worse. Fewer fans watch, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to end this whole missive with this one point before I turn it back to you. When you talk USC and UCLA, and I said in another discussion that'll probably end up in a different video if you're watching online, I don't blame USC and UCLA for leaving, but a part of that is that USC and UCLA had to act in their own interest, right? There's a $50 million gap per year coming between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the new TV networks, and they've got to leave. But the problem is they have to leave because for their survival, if they want to be a major program, they can't afford the $50 million gap. But by leaving, they may destroy the Pac-12, which may destroy all fan interest in the Pac-12, which actually could mean, and probably will mean, ratings for Big Ten games goes down because West Coast fans won't have any interest in the sport anymore. So USC and UCLA leave for more money themselves, but in doing so, everybody makes less money. And as a sport, the sport nets less money from this move, even though the individual schools, they may go up a little bit. And this whole scenario is the very definition of a race to the bottom. People making moves for their own individual benefit that hurt the group and the collective. And over time, it hurts the group and collective so much that the move you did to make yourself money ends up hurting you money and hurting you in money. And then everybody ends up poorer than where they started with.
And Josh, this is interesting because what you're saying is basically short-term interest for very limited people benefit. And who argues with us the most on NIL and transfers? Agents, player representatives, people who can come in, bleed the situation dry, personally benefit, get out and leave a dead carcass, in their wake. And that's what's going to happen with college football if everything is about an immediate money thing. The same thing with the networks. They don't understand the delicate nature of the fan interest and what will happen. And you're right. Like in 2005, Texas and USC, everybody in the country watching these two teams. Everybody in the country watched that going down to that game. And then that game had massive interest. If you look at Birmingham, Alabama is the number one rated market for college football. And if you look, when Ohio State plays Michigan, you'll have their respective, like, you'll have the bigger, like Detroit, Columbus, not necessarily Ann Arbor because it's smaller and everybody's there, not necessarily watching it on TV. Like the third or fourth down is going to be Birmingham. Greenville, South Carolina, always in the top 10. Baton Rouge, always in the top 10 for games out of market. And that perfectly underscores what you're saying, is it's a national sport that's going hyper regionalized because they're overreacting to short-term situations. And it's crazy to me because the people that are worried about this or complaining about this with parity going away and super conferences, they started this with the playoff. The playoff was supposed to solve the problem of Alabama LSU in 2011. It didn't solve it. And what it did, unintended consequences, is that not only the ratings that we were talking about in the playoffs, but also all the bowls that used to have super high interest, New Year's Six bowls, and then the other kind of secondary bowls, nobody cares anymore because it's all about the playoffs. So what's their answer right now, Josh? Super conferences and 16-team playoffs. And to me, that just totally, it's a misunderstanding of what college football is, and you touched on it earlier, and this is maybe the last thing we'll say, I'll let you close out with this, is not only the delicate fan interest, but the uniqueness of the regular season is in jeopardy right now. And I don't think people realize that if the interest of the regular season goes away, then the interest for college football goes away.
There's a really good anecdote that backs this up. So if you want to talk about bowls, and you said bowl interest has gone away, if you look at every year, bowl ratings dating back all the way down to 2000, New Year's Six bowls, that is the Fiesta Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl, I guess Fiesta, Peach, it sort of varied time to time. There was one game in that entire period that was under 7.5 million, and that was the West Virginia Clemson game in 2011. Every other game, every other New Year's Six game in that entire period had, I think, at least 9 million people. Yeah, that was the second lowest in 2 decades. Last year, ratings for the New Year's Six bowls, not a single one had 9 million. The best was UGA. When I say last year, I mean, like, I'm really talking about 2020 because those are the numbers we have. But 2020, the Peach Bowl had 8.7 million. The Orange Bowl had 7.5. The Fiesta Bowl, Iowa State, Oregon, only had 6.7. Cotton Bowl, Oklahoma, Florida, only 5.7 million people watched it. And you go back, all right, you say, like, well, that's fine. That was 2020. That's the pandemic. All right, let's go back a couple years. 2018. The Fiesta Bowl only had 8.4 million. That was LSU, Central Florida. Florida, Michigan, 8.3 million people. The BCS Bowls have been consistently lower post-playoff in terms of ratings than before. I don't mean competitiveness. I mean ratings. And that should be your indicator for where the regular season could go. Because if all these people are tuned out and they don't care and they feel like my school doesn't matter, so why do I care? I'm not going to watch the rest of the sport. You're going to see the national ratings go down. And everything in the sport depends on that. Now, the viewpoint from a lot of people has been, well, we need to expand the playoff because then we're going to stay relevant the whole season. Look, one, that's not really true. Again, that's a short-term thing, maybe just like the first year of the playoff. Playoff numbers and bowl numbers were crazy in 2014 because everybody had this idea that someone different was going to win every year. And it went away because the reality is we discovered that you give Alabama and Ohio State a mulligan and Clemson a mulligan, and one of them is just going to win in a playoff. And you're going to see the same thing, I think, in the regular season. You're going to see these teams that are not in a super conference that can't compete in recruiting. They're going to realize that their season doesn't matter, and they're going to tune out. They're not going to watch their own team. They certainly aren't going to watch other teams that they don't care about. And when their school is finally just out of the running for any discussion for anything, the ratings are going to tank in the regular season, just like they've tanked in the BCS Bowls. And with those ratings going down, all the money goes down, and this whole house of cards, which again is just based off pure entertainment and interest, that is the only reason it generates money, that house of cards is going to fold. A lot of teams are going to fold with it. And as those teams fold and the fans don't have a team anymore, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I think the worst reality you could end up with is a college football world that's maybe 24 teams, but because they're the only ones playing, they're 24 teams playing for far fewer fans than they do today. And that's a really sad reality, but one that I don't think is outside the realm of possibility.
So this one was kind of a downer. We get it. We've got one coming. That's how do we fix college football? Remember, we talked about in the beginning, it doesn't have to go this way. It does not have to. So all of the stuff that we've talked about are kind of a natural, organic flow into these negatives. We got some positives to talk about. So check that one out. Keep an eye out. It probably won't post the same time as this negative Nancy one does, but it's coming.